You often hear, especially in the belt of the Bible, God is good all the time. But let's be honest, it's mostly from people who think it best to constantly suck his deific dick in an attempt to stay the golden child in a narcissistic family dynamic they either subscribe to or crafted in their own mind. The motive for this silly saying, not supported by the facts, is to stave off a spanking from the big guy through imagining that the relationship that best suits God's needs is indeed one of supply in the form of praise, worship, adoration, constant reaffirming that their God is super duper awesome and might give them all the goodies if they keep up the charade they're always on his nice list, but never to be found on the naughty. God is most certainly not good all the time, and even the good old King James affirms this in the book of Amos when it says, "Shall a trumpet be blown in the city, and the people not be afraid? Shall there be evil in a city, and the Lord hath not done it?" It is evident in an authentic reading of scriptures, as well as experience of divinity, that on more occasion than not, God enjoys strapping on its combat boots before grabbing the belt to tiptoe downstairs for specifically busting the asses of those who either piss God off or that it genuinely doesn't like, and created for the purpose of its taking pleasure in punishing them. Don't fool yourself into thinking that the devil and the demons at his command aren't God and its employees dressing up for DragonCon to engage in carnal pleasures and violent delights here in the underworld we call Earth. Don't let the clergy of love and light hypnotize you to accept their sycophantic facade of an omnipresent, omnipowerful supreme being that cannot also be found inside the darkness, getting his rocks off just like the rest of us. There are even quite a few spiritualists now replacing the word evil with error in the hit single known as the Lord's Prayer to further their denial of God's devilish side with word salad. Wanting to believe that the all-seeing deity they secretly fear is all sugar and spice and everything nice, 1 billion light years apart or separated from chaos, rage, and wrath. For it is simply not so. The devil is God on holiday, a role to play in the masquerade of Maya it created, to do anything and everything it wants to damn well do, with a pinch of plausible deniability to lead most to believe that surely God would not do a thing to them. And this is why they choose to maintain these beliefs of an all-good God, to convince themselves that surely their own sins will not find them out, and the bill for their violations upon others will not come due. While God openly endorses evil and relishes in its implementation, this word has been confused with what actually pisses God off: violence. Evil is a point of view, as this vampire who lost to me in a game of poker once said. What is chaos to the fly is dinner for the widow that spun the web. What is a cruel turn of fate to the pedophile that gets its brains blown out is justice to the parents who wept that the innocence of a child was taken from him too soon. What is seen as a tower moment for a sexually deviant heathen that cultivates herpes after living a life of luring in prey for sport is retribution for those they raped. Do not think for 1 second that God will not don its horns and breathe fire on you and everything you love when it shows up to stomp you into the ground for going against the natural law of the Uberverse in violating the free will of another through threat, duress, or force. God will fuck you up. Not only will God fuck you up, but God will revel while it wields the whip. Those on the business end of his devilish designs cry Satan and placate themselves by play pretending that the adversary is coming up against them because they are oh so special, when the fact of the matter is God's actually gaslighting them into oblivion because it thinks they're an asshole. The reason God has brought misery on them is because they are miserable, and have consistently been so, while sucking others into the void of their nothingness through undermining the sovereignty of others. Does God take pleasure in playing the horned one or adversary to those whom have it coming? Is the aspect of God not the far extreme on the spectrum as the devil? Not an independent enemy, but a modality within its own nature. Of course, just as love is on the same line as hate in a different direction, the devilish side of God is no different. Even when not personally attending to a misfit within a person suit to rain Hades upon their life, God certainly delegates the dirty work to other aspects of itself in legions of demonic hordes, both seen and unseen alike. For if all creation, including hell and its hosts, were deemed good by God in the beginning, then logic dictates that the wrath of God is simply a darker aspect of how the divine gets its jollies in the light. And all thanks to puppets whose strings it has pulled from the beginning with the illusion of free will they were operating under. No, Those that act violent by violations in this world are not given grace by repeating some prayer or mantra or cleansing at the rotting, not ripe old age of 64 or 65 after an existence of debauchery at the expense of others who didn't give in to that sort of thing. Nope. It's scorching pitchforks of misery, suffering, solitude, rejection, and fear with weeping and gnashing of teeth for those who validate God's devilish side via poor conduct. Like Johnny Cash said, God's gonna cut you down. Only when God does, they will be naive and say it was Satan that ate their groceries. There was a story once written that was read of a harlot that sought to eat the child of another through machinations of her own beastly offspring's deeds. Coveting the life and essence of this woman, the whore would stop at nothing for that which she coveted and took great efforts to blaspheme and steal from her atop the beast she rode. A space was given to the whore to advance in her sin until the time was come for God to fix its gaze upon the detestable bitch, with every horrific, cruel, merciless, and stored up punishment worthy of God's wrath. The entity that is all manifest in curb stomp mode to drag a bitch just before having the whore's own child thrown into a pit in a cage where hope of reprieve is nowhere to be found. The whore, for years, had wiped her mouth, saying to herself she had done no wrong, but when the penny dropped, she surely found the devil upon her doorstep coming to collect heads for the violence that had been inflicted on the woman clothed with the son, who would bear a man-child through birth pangs. Was the whore amazed at the visitation of the divine in the form of the devil? Absolutely. But did God enjoy every wicked moment of flailing the flesh of a whore and her seed for her ill will, intent, and action? You're goddamn right God did. It makes God horny as a high school imp to don its dark cloak when circumstances call for evil upon those whom evil is due. So maybe it's not so wise to assume that if things are taking a turn for the worse in your life, when they obviously do, that God is testing you or building you up or making you better. Perhaps the possibility of what could be perceived as a demonic attack from both the subjective and objective uberverse, with all the internal and external fears or horrors that could be perceived as not you being chosen for anything other than being the object of God's BDSM fetish of inflicting pain for pleasure. It is attempted to be comprehended by giving it the nickname the devil and labeled as bad, immoral, and destructive. But if God knows anything, it's that you can't make an omelet without smashing some eggs up, and maybe you're next on the menu. After all, when the king is hungered and calls for steak, he cares naught of the story from the cow. Let's not rob God of credit in creating the modality of the devil, because sometimes it isn't divine healing that is required in this world, but that of divine destruction. Like Krishna becoming Shiva, surely the source of all vibration is both creation and consumption. And if you live like a D-bag, sooner or later you're bound to get it. It is all one thing, and one way or another you will get what you gave. When God's best zoot suit in the devil is adorned, don't be surprised when you're impaled by God's horns. Thanks for showing up. Don't forget to subscribe to ZenInTheCar.com for all of our other goodness. And I now give you permission to pick up my novel, Then Came the Flood, by Daniel Lewis Crumpton, wherever the finest of retail books are sold. You can get it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, BooksAMillion.com. Just pick the book up. You won't regret it. If you do, I might morph into my final form.